The final item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number 5128 in the name of Kenneth Gibson on the origins of addiction. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. I call on Kenneth Gibson to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I thank MSPs for all parties who signed my motion to enable this debate to take place. I also thank Anne MacDonald, Sam H, Health and Mind and colleagues from the cross-party group on survivors of childhood sexual abuse who have assisted my preparation and were keen to highlight an issue never before debated in the Scottish Parliament. I am pleased that CPG members are in the gallery and MSP CPG colleagues will take part in the debate. The Scottish Government estimate of the number of people aged 15 to 64 years old with problem drug abuse in Scotland in 2009-10 was 59,600. This may be an underestimate as it is difficult to evaluate an often hidden population. The NHS also estimate that around 9% of men and 4% of women show signs of alcohol dependence, and with nearly 1 in 4 Scots smoking cigarettes, addiction is a chronic problem for many. Addictions can be defined as persistent, compulsive dependence towards a behaviour or substance. These are often beyond an addict's self-control, and he or she may be unable to distinguish between want of a substance and the need for it. Often addicts are portrayed as people whose bad life choices have led them into addiction, and indeed in some occasions this is indeed the case. There is a sense that problems are self-inflicted and a lack of sympathy towards individuals perceived as being responsible for their own addiction. However, addictions have many causes: biological, social or psychological. The direct cause has not yet been definitively discovered. If it was, perhaps many in Scotland wouldn't now face a battle against drugs, alcohol and tobacco. Biological factors such as the brain's orbital frontal cortex, which can differ between addict and non-addict, and predisposed genetic components are recognised. For example, 7 genes have been identified as predisposing an individual to smoking, including variants in nicotine receptor genes, which also predict the success of nicotine replacement therapies. Social causes include addictive substance availability, peer and family pressure worthy of addictions, and social deprivation. Psychological and physiological dependency leading to addiction can take myriad forms, from gambling to drug abuse. Strong evidence supports the predisposition of adverse experiences to drug, alcohol and tobacco abuse. It's therefore important to acknowledge addictions as often an experience-dependent condition rather than just substance-dependent. This should underpin the treatment approach and ultimately improve the likelihood of recovery. Psychological causes involving the experience-dependent aspect of addictions often include traumatic adverse experiences in childhood, leading to an increased likelihood of developing addictions in later life. A major component of such adversity is childhood sexual abuse. A study published in a French journal, Annales médico-psychologiques, highlighted the connection between victims of rape and sexual abuse in childhood to developing addictions. The study explained that rape is a risk factor for post-traumatic stress disorders and addictive behaviours, including alcohol abuse, drug use, repeated suicide attempts or eating disorders. Another study published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress in 2003 found victims of rape to be 13.4 times more likely to develop 2 or more alcohol-related problems and 26 times more likely to have 2 or more serious drug-related problems. These results strengthen the connection between adverse experiences and addictive behaviours. According to the NSPCC, nearly 18,000 sexual crimes against children under 16 were recorded in England in 2010-11. This is almost certainly an underestimate due to underreporting. There is no reason to suggest that, as a proportion of the population, Scottish figures would be very different. The NSPCC also published a report in 2011, Child Abuse and Neglect in the UK Today, for which over 6,000 children, young adults and parents were interviewed. The shocking finding was that 1 in 6 children aged 11 to 17 have experienced sexual abuse, and 34% of victims did not report abuse to anyone. Severe trauma suffered by survivors of childhood sexual abuse makes them vulnerable to addictions, and teenagers with alcohol and drug problems are 18 to 21 times more likely to have been sexually abused than not. Dean X, a survivor, said that, to blot out stuff from my past, every day of my life I was taking drugs, drinking every day. From when I woke in the morning, I took cocaine to work, vowing to bring myself back down, and I was drinking. Gordon Y used alcohol to blank out the memory of abuse too. I was alcoholic. Every time people asked, I would run a mile, wouldn't even speak to them. I didn't associate it with what happened in the past. I just felt like I couldn't understand the different feelings going on, tell myself I wouldn't trust anyone else. the toll it was taking on my body. Anger, promiscuity and dissociation from emotions such as love or empathy are also symptomatic in many addicted survivors. Clearly, links between adverse experiences and developing addictions must be understood in order to effectively manage and recognise an addict's condition. It is imperative to investigate the source of an individual's addictions, including, in far too many cases, sexual abuse when young. Abuse which has damaged their self-esteem, self-confidence and led them to believe that addictive and destructive behaviour can help them escape past nightmares. The link between childhood adversity and addiction must be acknowledged by prevention initiatives. It is important to consider the two components involved in the patient's condition, the adverse experience and the addiction. Treatment should integrate the two components, as treatment for the addiction can only be effective when treating the underpinning experience which caused the addiction itself. This approach will greatly improve the chances of recovery. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, a branch of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, proposes two models to adopt when treating survivors of child abuse and neglect for their addictions. The integrated model addresses dual diagnosis, where both substance and childhood abuse are treated simultaneously in the same programme. The concurrent model involves the substance abuse treatment, where appropriate referrals are also made to mental health services to treat the childhood abuse. In both models, teamwork between the counsellor delivering addiction support and the mental health practitioner supplying physiotherapy for the child abuse is essential for a successful outcome. Addiction and counselling services in Scotland offer a very high standard of care to patients. Nevertheless, it is important for services to recognise addictions as experience-dependent conditions and adapt treatment appropriately. A recent audit by the Addiction Psychology Caseload by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde found that 49% of patients receiving counselling had suffered from childhood sexual abuse. Improved links with the British Psychological Society for Survivors Scotland and psychologists working with survivors of childhood sexual abuse were made as a direct result of this study. Treatment for survivors of childhood sexual abuse with addiction is very complex. Identifying this link is essential to ensure appropriate treatment. Services in Scotland need to develop a more trauma-informed service, as neglecting addiction as an experience-dependent condition will adversely impair treatment success. I asked the Minister in his response to this debate to advise the Chamber what progress has been made so far and what steps will be taken to ensure traumatic experiences are properly taken into account when treating addictions.
Thank you. I now call Margaret Mitchell to be followed by James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by congratulating Kenneth Gibson for securing this important debate this evening. The Adverse Childhood Experience Study, The Origins of Addictions, confirms the correlation between addictions in adulthood and adverse child experiences, including childhood sexual abuse. Those of us who are members of the Adult Survivors of Childhood Sexual Abuse Cost Party Group are only too well aware that drink and drug addiction resulting from the trauma of childhood sexual abuse and the impetus to drown or block post-traumatic symptoms such as flashbacks and nightmares has been a huge issue for many years. Despite this, it's been really hard to get these individuals recognised centrally on the drug and alcohol agenda. Yet, so very many of these addicts are parents who have been abused themselves, which not only causes general problems with parenting, but means they tend to be locked in addiction and fail time after time to stay off their addiction. This, in turn, raises child protection issues. Meanwhile, the continuous and escalating financial cost to the state and voluntary sector of providing services in an attempt to cope with both male as well as female individuals with these problems is immense. In some respects, this is nearly throwing good money after bad, because many of the frontline public services are not geared to deal with childhood sexual abuse. The motion highlights why, quite simply, these addictions would be treated more effectively if addiction services and psychological support was dealt with in an experience-dependent and not just substance-dependent condition. In other words, the approach recognises that the root cause of some addictions is an unconscious but compulsive use of materials such as drugs and alcohol in an effort to block out adverse prior life experiences, the majority of which have been concealed by the individual out of shame, secrecy or social taboo. In effect, the absence of other alternatives for help with and respite from their trauma. These individuals self-medicate using alcohol, tobacco and drugs in order to seek short-term relief to enable survivors of childhood sexual abuse to escape from the horrific and traumatic memories and flashbacks. In 2009, the Equal Opportunities Committee inquiry report on female offenders in the criminal justice system revealed a very significant correlation between childhood abuse leading to substance abuse and offending in adult life. Here, Open Secret in Falkirk, a community-based organisation which provides support services for survivors and their families, has done some excellent work with offenders. Consequently, the provision of the right services for childhood sexual abuse survivors, delivered in the right way at the right time, will have the following positive outcomes: reducing the demand on other services and becoming a significant contributor to lowering adult recidivism and offending, including violent offending in Scotland. This is why Stop It Now Scotland, a national programme for the prevention of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, delivers basic information on child sexual abuse and existing services across the prison population in Scotland. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, most childhood sexual abuse cases still remain unreported and undetected because prevention has not been prioritised. Being serious about tackling the root causes of the alcohol and drug addiction of those who are adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse not only shows a longer-term and informed determination to create a positive, lasting change, but is an excellent example of where targeted, preventative spend can make a huge difference. And I therefore again congratulate Kenneth Gibson for tabling this motion for debate this evening and hope that the Minister in his response will take on board some of the points raised about preventative spend particularly.
Thank you. I now call James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to start off by congratulating Kenneth Gibson on securing this members' debate on the extremely important issue of the causes of and our attitudes to addiction. Whilst there have been a number of key initiatives introduced by the Scottish Government, including the Road to Recovery, which is the country's first cohesive approach to tackling drug misuse, addiction remains a problem, huge problem in Scotland. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's addiction services are responsible for the delivery of addiction treatment and care services for 12,000 clients alone, and the delivery of these services costs the NHS millions of pounds a year. In Glasgow, for too long, the public common response around the public health challenges it faces regarding addiction and the accompanying cost to individuals and their friends and family has been to say that it's just the Glasgow way, that it's part of who we are as Glaswegians with a sick man of Europe tag, and to more or less leave it like that, deal with the issue as it arises and not look at the root causes. It does continue to remain the case that the silver bullet for so many of Glasgow's public health issues is in tackling the underlying deprivation and poverty. But that's a debate for another day. But this is why I was very interested in the work mentioned in Mr Gibson's motion and the relationship between the adverse childhood experiences and addiction. The study in question took place over 2 years with 17,000 participants. Each participant completed a confidential survey that contained questions about childhood maltreatment and family dysfunction, as well as items detailing their current health status and behaviours. Included in the survey were emotional, physical or sexual abuse, emotional or physical neglect, and growing up in a household where someone was an alcoholic, a drug user, mentally ill, suicidal, where the mother was treated violently, or where a household member had been imprisoned during the patient's childhood. The information on any adverse childhood experience, ACE, of the patient was combined with the result of their physical examination to form the baseline data. Less than a third of the participants had 0 ACEs to report, but where ACEs were reported, the link between these adverse childhood conditions and addiction was found. As the number of ACEs conditions increased, so does the chances of being a user of street drugs or of having problems with tobacco or alcohol abuse increase. The research also found an interesting parallel between the problem of addiction being the solution to a much deeper problem, namely one of the ACE conditions. This is why it's far more detrimental to the recovery of addicts to believe their behaviour and subsequent addiction to always be a result of poor life choices, rather than what it often is, a mask covering underlying issues. This masking link is further explored in the research conducted by Sarah Nelson at the Centre for Research and Families, University of Edinburgh, and supported by Health and Mind. The research conducted a number of interviews with male survivors of childhood sexual assault. More than half of the survivor group became addicted to drink or drugs in their teens, and a quarter before they had reached their teens. Half of that group had also experienced another addiction, such as gambling, compulsive eating, sexual addiction, compulsive self-harm, or workaholism. In one case, a young ex-prisoner used drugs to, as others have already said, get rid of my problems, to make my problems go away. They never did. They just disappeared for 10, 15 minutes, half an hour a day. In another, I know I used to drink to forget it all. One was talking of his addiction to food and sexual addiction. I think I want to subliminally make myself unattractive, and then because I felt fat and ugly and horrible, because I was putting on weight, I'd think, right, I'll go out, try and test anybody to see if they'll have sex with me or not. All talk about their trouble in addictive relationships with alcohol, drugs, sex, food or work, and the common theme is that this is a mask to stop themselves thinking about what happened to them as children, and this is where the origins of their addiction lies. Whilst not everyone who has an addiction has had a traumatic experience of some kind in their childhood, having an adverse childhood experience substantially increases the likelihood of addiction in later life. It's for this reason that we must continue to work to ensure that our children are safer than ever before from avoidable harm, that if children grow up with a parent in prison, that they're given help and support from a young age to help them deal with it in a less destructive way. That safe spaces are provided for children where they can bring issues of emotional, physical or sexual assault to people who will be able to help them. And that we continue to champion the work done in the third sector across Scotland by organisations such as Children's First or the NSPCC. But as well as trying to prevent an ACE manifesting itself into an addiction in adulthood, it's also important that we change the way that we view addiction presently, so that we move to a system where we empathise with the experience of the person, not just judge them for the choices that they've made, with no consideration of what the underlying causes of their choices might have been in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Minister, Michael Matheson, to respond to the debate. Minister, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I, like others, join in congratulating Kenny Gibson in securing time for this incredibly important debate and bringing a number of very significant issues to the attention of Parliament here this evening. I have listened with great interest to the contributions from those who have participated in the debate. As those members will be aware, the Origins of Addiction report raises a number of very complex issues. Ultimately, it shows the clear link between early childhood experience and negative outcomes in adulthood. And for all of us, I'm sure, we share the same goal of finding better ways to address these issues. In doing so, we must treat the resulting problems more effectively that come about as a result of early childhood experiences, but also we have to focus on prevention to stop these problems from occurring in the first place, as several members have made reference to in their own contributions. And one of the most important times where we can start that process of preventing some of these issues from occurring in the first place is during the early years of a child's development. As a government, we are very clear in our, what I believe is a simple but very ambitious aspiration that we have for children in Scotland, and that is for Scotland to be the best place in the world to grow up. For our children to become successful, confident and effective individuals, as our nation needs, we must nurture every element of their well-being. We know that early childhood experiences have lifelong effects on cognitive and emotional development, and that chronic unrelenting stress in early childhood, whether caused by neglect or repeated abuse, can be toxic to that child's brain development. And we know that between birth and 3 years of age, children are more likely to experience some form of mistreatment, and 16 out of every 1,000 children experience it. This is something I'm sure all members in the Chamber would agree should not be tolerated. Your children have the right to be cared for and protected from harm, and to grow up in a safe environment where their needs are quickly and effectively addressed. Their well-being and safety is a key priority for this government. Now, to do this, we should support the practitioners who work in this field to address these issues and to provide that safe environment. And a few examples of the work that we're taking forward to help to support this work is, for example, through the National Child Protection Learning and Development Framework, which was published in November, which sets out the necessary skills for all staff and volunteers in contact with children to keep them safe. We've also published Scotland's first National Risk Assessment Toolkit for child protection, which will help professionals better identify concerns among vulnerable children. And we are taking action to ensure that child sexual exploitation in Scotland is detected, dealt with and ultimately prevented. We also have stronger arrangements for preventing children from being exposed to individuals who perpetrate these offences. The Protection of Vulnerable Groups, or PVG, Act came into force in 2011. It introduced a new membership scheme for people working with vulnerable groups, which allows Disclosure Scotland to act much more quickly and promptly when new information is received indicating that an individual might pose a risk to vulnerable groups. Looking to the future, we recently consulted on proposals for the Children and Young People's Bill, which aims to provide real and sustained long-term benefits to children and their families. The bill will seek to embed partnership working in our services to ensure that services are designed and delivered around the child's whole well-being. And ultimately, in the context of this particular debate this evening, are better able to prevent the horrors of sexual abuse and to act more quickly to identify and support victims where it does occur. But we must continue to also work with the whole of society as it is right now. As part of our commitment to health and well-being of adult survivors of childhood abuse, we launched Survivors Scotland, a national strategy for childhood abuse in 2005. We have raised awareness of childhood abuse, supported training for frontline staff and services for survivors with an investment of some £5 million since 2007. We've also agreed to extend the Time to be Heard model since its successful pilot in 2010 to all institutional care residents through a national confidential forum. And we've consulted on proposals for the forum and will take these forward this year through the provisions of the Victims and Witnesses Bill. This will offer survivors an opportunity to talk about their experiences as children in care and have those experiences acknowledged. We also need to ensure better support for individuals where addiction to alcohol or drugs is an issue. And through our national drug strategy, The Road to Recovery, we aim to tackle drug use through the use of focus on recovery, acknowledging that individuals have a range of needs that need to be addressed, including the underlying causes that members have made reference to, and ensuring that individuals have a say in their own treatment on their path to long-term sustained recovery, be it clinical or psychological. However, recovery only starts with the ambition for a better life. When an individual reaches out for help, it's crucial at that important milestone in their life that they get the right help at the right time. Addiction services in Scotland are undergoing redesign to focus on the whole person and their journey to recover. To support this, we have invested a record £30 million via NHS boards to alcohol and drug partnerships to provide frontline drug services and to offer support to those who require it. We've also provided some £39 million to ADPs to deliver local alcohol strategies in line with local need and priorities. And reduced alcohol and alcohol treatment waiting times to a maximum of 3 weeks for over 90% of people starting drug and alcohol treatment within the period of referral between July and September 2012. Alongside this, we have also created a network of alcohol and drug partnerships to deliver appropriate health and social care services at a local level, taking account of local needs and individual circumstances. All of this will support individuals to become contributing members of society again. Presiding Officer, in drawing my remarks to a close, I want to emphasise the importance of this very complex issue. I fully acknowledge the link between early childhood experience and negative outcomes in adulthood, which the Origins of Addiction report clearly highlights. I firmly believe that addiction can be more effectively treated as an experience-dependent condition and not just as a substance-dependent condition. There is more we can do in this area, and we are determined to do more in helping to also prevent people being damaged from substance misuse as well. Presiding Officer, I'm very grateful to Kenny Gibson for bringing this debate before Parliament, and no doubt, knowing Mr Gibson, he will continue to pursue these issues with this chamber.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes Kenneth Gibson's debate on the origins of addiction, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.